I have only loved one woman. Only one. My entire life. Your sister.
Imagine falling down to your death and in the last few seconds having to think about how you have been wrong and insignificant all the time. That is Liza Aaron's exact state in her final moments. The final words she hears make her estimate the mistakes of her life as she measures the fall to her death. What a wonderful conclusion to a tragic character who was always under someone else's command until just before her death. Final words reveal a lot about characters, more so in GOT, where death is aplenty and always around the corner. So as a lead up to the final season of GOT next month, let's take a look at and analyze the final words of all the characters who have died until now. What does it reveal about them? What does it say about them? This is Ankit Sinha taking you on a film tour at Qweed.in. The first important death was Viserys Targaryen. Viserys was full of righteousness, a belief that everyone owed him a crown by legacy alone. He manages to win none of the devotion or fear necessary for a crown, but does win the hatred of everyone around him. So when push comes to shove, he is given a crown that fits the hatred he evokes. Besides, he was full of pride, never stopping to ask please to anyone for anything, because he thought everything was his own. It is ironical then that his last word should be,
Daddy, please!
A crown for king.
Robert Baratheon. To me, his death is a tragic character arc in GOT in a very unique way. Robert was about disinterest and decline. By now, it is very clear that his passion for Lyanna Stark was unrequited as she had a consensual relationship with Rhaegar. Robert declines in his life in the memory of someone who he loved but never actually had at all. It makes me think of Robert as a tragic figure not because he lost who he loved, but because he lives unaware of the fact that he wasn't loved back. His doomed death comes on one of his pleasure rides, coordinated by his own wife after Robert's lonesome and maladaptive period as a ruler. It says that he wasn't much special in the whole Game of Thrones, but more a disinterested bystander, whose life was manipulated by others around him. He is not much different from Liza Aaron, just that he is unaware and disinterested. It is fitting then that when he dies, his last words also evoke a sort of disinterest in the whole affair.
Give me something for the pain and let me die.
Next up is the Stark contingent, the image of everything pure and incorrupt in GOT. Firstly, Ned Stark. Ned was identified by his uncompromising honesty. But here it is just his honesty that he has to compromise, so his other role can be fulfilled, that of a father protecting his children. As he takes on the role of a liar and begins his speech, the Stark theme plays in a horrifying tempo behind.
I come before you to confess my treason in the sight of gods and men. I betrayed the faith of my king and the trust of my friend Robert.
It results in the most unexpected twists of this series. His last words are whispers, which the actor Sean Bean admitted to be a prayer, which is strikingly similar to Mahatma Gandhi's last words upon his assassination, drawing similarity between the two towering figures of reality and fiction. Then there is Sir Roderick, whose death remarks the erosion of the Stark value in how Theon moves on to kill the Stark that there is within him in order to become an invading Greyjoy. Oh, and Renly had some last words around here too.
Together, we could end this war in a fortnight.
But George R.R. Martin believed on the contrary. Coming back, Theon's doing all of this clearly under the influence of the Iron Islanders around him, and he is influenced even when Sir Roderick calls him a coward and lines himself up to execute the beheading of Sir Roderick. That he cannot finish the beheading with one swing of his sword is firstly a note on his inefficiency, but it's also a beautiful symbol of how he just cannot get that Stark out of him with effortless ease. The rain suddenly heaves down in showers like Theon's own restless mind as he just kicks Sir Roderick's head off its torso. Last words amid all this chaos?
God's help you, Theon Greyjoy. Now you are truly lost.
On the other hand, Mr. Luwin's death remarked the end of an era for the Starks. Winterfell is burned down, and Bran and Rickon, the last remaining Starks, are sent off on their own journeys by none other than Maester Luwin, who is the Watcher, the guardian of the values and the knowledge of the North, and whose death symbolizes the erosion of the ages-old spirit of Winterfell. For all the members of the Stark family to find their calling in their journeys and reconstruct it again. And where does this death take place then? The thousands years old weirwood tree in Winterfell's Godswood. By this time, the erosion of the Stark value can now be sensed most of all in Robb and Catelyn, who for the first time among the Stark family act behind each other's back and grow mistrust amongst themselves. Robb breaks an oath that he shouldn't have, Cat makes a mistake that she shouldn't have, leading to a distance in their relationship. With a whole lot of scheming in the midst as the northern cause is punctured slowly. It is by the Red Wedding that the mother and son finally begin to reconcile, but it's too late by then. Dying in the midst of his off-guard army, Robb, the son of Winterfell before the king in the north, turns towards Cat, saying,
Mother, the Lannisters send their regards.
Cat's final words aren't words at all, they are just... Which brings us to probably the most satisfying death in GOT, Joffrey. It's so ironical that Joffrey, who made a career out of throwing insults and abuse at people in public, dies choking on his throat as he's doing just that once again. It is extremely cathartic because it's like the writers are saying what we want to say to him all the time. Shut up already. As for Talisa, I think she can be bracketed into the death of the lovers in GOT. Love in GOT is always destroyed by what that love is always trying to keep itself away from. The love of Talisa and Robb is protecting itself from an oath that Robb was meant to uphold, which then transforms into deceit and kills both of them. The love of Ygritte and Jon was keeping itself away from their allegiances to two conflicted groups, which is exactly what comes back to kill Ygritte. Tyrion and Shae, their love was keeping itself away from the mess of the realm, Shae even asking him to run away with her. The mess of the realm is exactly what comes between them as Tyrion himself kills Shae, who by then has become a tool of that realm. His last words to her make sense.
I'm sorry.
He should have left while he had the chance. I suppose Mr. Aemon was right when he said,
Love is the death of duty.
but as it turns out, duty is as much the death of love in Game of Thrones. If love in GOT is destroyed by its own antidote, the big men, the men of resolve and discipline and warriorship are brought down by one petty error in their character. There's Tywin Lannister, known to be one of the fiercest warriors and the shrewdest diplomats in Westeros. Yet his death happens neither in the battlefield nor in the courtroom, but on the private seat of his toilet. It is fitting because he failed nowhere else but in his private domestic world, in failing to look past his grudge with his own son. It makes sense that his life should end there with the last word showing how even the mighty Tywin was a weak person after all.
Son of mine.
I am your son. I have always been your son.
Anyway, his death ends up sending Tyrion across to Essos, effectively completing Tyrion's journey from the Wall to the east. It's not the fathers after all who are the central forces in the main events of GOT, it's the children who must reconstruct everything. Stannis spends his time following the directions of an extraterrestrial god, even to the extent of burning his own daughter in the process, which ends up in his wife committing suicide and some men of his army abandoning him too. Tension grows in Stannis' mind, as following a godly voice he seems to be losing human support on Earth. Lying wounded at the end of a lost battle, as Brienne approaches to execute him for murdering his brother Renly, Stannis perhaps takes a moment contemplating how it wasn't his superstitions that succeeded, but something he did on Earth that comes back around to kill him. Stannis resigns at the beautiful irony of fate that the big man's life has become, and becomes a man of duty and justice once again when he says his last words.
Go on, do your duty.
It is only Olenna Tyrell who, even as she is dying after being outmaneuvered and her army losing the battle, goes away keeping her superiority intact. She drinks the poison that Jaime offers and then offers a poison to Jaime himself by informing how she was the one behind Joffrey's death, leaving one another person dumbfounded and muted in front of her one last time before she dies. There were some other big men too, some literally big men, who were the opposite of the others I mentioned before them. Hodor's death is quite clearly one of the remarkable Game of Thrones moments. The Northerners always had this mysticism about them, far from the heat and the politics of the South, and Bran Stark touring through history was quietly confirming their unusual powers. This scene became the conclusion of that, in realizing how one of the most routine quirks of a minor character of Winterfell had such a transcendental relationship with the events of their world. Bran's emotionally shaken reaction to the revelation is exactly how all of us feel watching it. As to Wun the giant, remember the first time Jon had seen a giant? Ygritte had advised him not to look them in the eye as the giants didn't like that. Here, Jon and Wun are doing just that, looking each other in the eye as partners, before Wun is shot right in the eye to his death. Which brings us to this bastard, the legitimate son of the North. Ramsay's hounds were an extension of himself, a symbol of his apathy and inhumanity. Even when he is bloodied by Jon and sat down, weakened and chained, his apathy and his sense of superiority doesn't disappear, which is why he mocks Sansa.
Our time together is about to come.
It is only when the very symbol of his apathy threatens him with the same horrifying treatment that he lent to others that he breaks in and panics. Story of a psychopath. It is funny then that his last word should be,
Stop! 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 Stop!
It all boils down to his death. Littlefinger's death seemed like some really goofy writing in season 7, but it's an important event all the same. He was the harbinger of all conflicts in Game of Thrones, always acting from the shadows. Once again, he's sitting comfortably, smug-faced, as another bit of courtroom drama unfolds because of his manipulation. Until he's finally asked to step out of his shadows to claim responsibility for everything that's happened until now. Changed into a shrewd man after his goof-up during Catelyn's marriage, his death eventually comes because he's off guard in his attentions to Cat's daughter Sansa. It comes all the way around for him too. His last words are spoken with tears on that constantly scheming face, which might have been Littlefinger the last time he must have been silly in claiming love for Sansa's mother as a naive boy.
I loved you more than anyone.
Even this you cannot tell if it's true or an act put up by him. His killing makes sense. All the players are in the open now. On to the Great War. Besides her, of course.